Flying School. My name is Christopher Van, and again our next pre-flight briefing, this time on climbing and descending. Our aim is to climb and descend the aircraft at recommended speeds, and these will be specific to the type of aircraft you fly. Why we need to cover these? Again, we need to climb the aircraft up, potentially over hills and terrain as we fly, and eventually descend, coming back into the circuit for approach and landing. Our threats and errors. Threats, other airplanes at all times, and the engine overheating. Errors that we can make: wrong pressure settings, wrong radio frequencies, running out of fuel, and finally altitude bursts. So going beyond and climbing past the altitude we were aiming to level off at. To manage both of these, we're going to keep that lookout going, FRIDA checks, and our climb and descent checks. Set of checks every time we do fly the manoeuvre. Now, similar to our turns, we're going to split this exercise and each climb and descent into 3 phases: the entry, the maintenance, and the exit. Initially starting off looking at the maximum rate of climb. So to enter the climb, we've got to do a series of climb checks first. These are: carpeet to be cold, T's and P's are in the green, mixture's fully rich, and the pressure setting is correct on the altimeter. After that, we have to do a good lookout. Looking out mainly above us, also around and behind, because we don't want to be climbing up into anybody's path. After that, we're going to use power, attitude, trim. So full power, keeping the aircraft in balance with some right rudder. Attitude, we will now pitch the aircraft up to select the climbing attitude. And again, this will depend on the aircraft you fly, and the instructor will go through that attitude, again using the horizon. Once the aircraft settled down at the climb speed, we can then trim the aircraft off, trim off that pressure you're holding using the elevator. If you have installed a rudder trim on the pipers, and if we're doing a very long climb, we could use the rudder trim as well. More cases than not, 90% of your climbs will just trim the aircraft out on the elevator. To maintain your climb then, we're going to keep that lookout going and keeping that scan going. Now, we can use the altimeter to help us, that every time as we climb, the altimeter, I've drawn on the board, the needle passes the top. We're going to do a lookout weave. Now we're just going to bank the aircraft using a gentle roll, just to have a look either side of the nose of the aircraft. With the nose up, that is quite a blind spot. So we're going to do a small weave just to look either side of the nose to have a look at that blind spot and make sure no one is there. Then keeping the scan going, the attitude at all times. The attitude controls our airspeed. Instruments, scanning more to the case of the ASI, our airspeed, and the altimeter as we climb up. And again, always keeping the aircraft in trim. Trimming makes your life, your workload a lot easier. So, lookout, attitude, instruments as you climb. Now eventually, we're going to need to level off. So, the key word is to anticipate. And anticipate the target altitude we want to level off at. About 1/10 the rate of climb. For example, if we were climbing at 500 feet a minute, 50 foot before, we want to start to level off. Once we get there, we then change the attitude back to straight and level. Assuming we're going to be in the cruise, we're going to be going from the climb and accelerating the aircraft to 90 knots. As you accelerate, again, our phrase of progressively adjusting the attitude and trimming. It's going to be adjusting the pitch, the nose of the aircraft down while accelerating. Power, again anticipating just before you get to 90 knots, just reduce that power to 2,300 RPM. Then we can trim the aircraft out, keeping that lookout going, and eventually do a Frida check. So again, just to recap, anticipate just before our target altitude, attitude, allowing then the aircraft to accelerate to 90 knots, power and trim. Now, if while you're in the climb, the altimeter passes the bottom, we also want to have a scan of the T's and P's. And one last thing about the climb, if we get above 1,000 feet, the fuel pump will need to go off. So 1,000 feet above ground level, the fuel pump would need to go off. So that is our climb. Moving now next to the descent, and we're going to do some gliding descents. Again, this will depend, the speed will depend on the aircraft you are flying. So for the entry, again, our descent checks first. Again, in this case, the carb heat this time goes on. Mixture fairly rich, T's and P's are in the green, and the correct pressure setting on the altimeter. A good lookout, again looking out below us this time, that's the way we're going. Power to idle, and then attitude we want to hold initially. The aircraft will start to decelerate once we get to our target speed for the descent. Then we at that point adjust the attitude. Also remember the attitude controls our airspeed. And then finally trim the aircraft off as required. So again, just to recap, it's just descent checks, lookout, power, attitude, trim. Once we're in the descent, we can maintain it by, again, that lookout, and there will be a weave. Every time the altimeter in the descent, passes the top of the altimeter, just do a small weave. Same as the climb. Attitude controls the airspeed, instruments keeping that scan going, especially with the airspeed indicator and the altimeter. Now, one extra point in the maintenance. This time, as the altimeter needle passes the bottom, we're going to want to do an engine warm. To do the engine warm, all we're looking to do is just to increase the power. It only needs to be a few hundred RPM just to warm the engine every 1,000 feet. Maintaining your glide speed while we do this. So the attitude will need to be adjusted very small amounts, but at all times it is controlling the airspeed. Moving on, so instruments and trim. It is the very same scan, lookout, attitude instruments, just with that weaving and the engine warming every 1,000 feet. To level off from the glide descent, again our keyword is to anticipate. If we're again targeting to level off, for example, at 1,000 feet, and we were descending at 500 feet a minute, we want to start to level off, to anticipate at 1,050 feet. To do this, we use PAT again. So power back to our straight and level setting of 2,300 RPM for the 90 knot cruise. Attitude with our pitch to our straight and level. We will then allow the aircraft to accelerate. Again, now progressively adjusting the attitude and trimming to maintain level flight. Once everything's in the aircraft settled at 90 knots, we can then trim the aircraft off and then keep that lookout scan going. So again, just anticipate, power, attitude, trim. Now one last point, once we've had some practice of these, will be side slipping. Now side slipping is a method that was used commonly in the past of aircraft before flaps were fitted, and still these days in aircraft that don't have flaps, again we still side slip. This way it is cross-controlling the controls. What we're doing is presenting a much larger bit of the aircraft to the airflow and increasing our drag. So to this we're going to coordinate rudder with yaw, and opposite aileron. Again, cross-controlling the controls. Then we will pitch to maintain our airspeed, and you will find this will allow us to pitch down more than you would regularly have done. That is then our climbing and descending. So just to recap again, always think of PAT or APT. PAT in the climb, to level off is APT, PAT in the descent, and PAT to level off. Thank you for watching, goodbye.